But if the man everyone ignores, the homeless guy sitting quietly on a park bench, was hiding a deadly past, when a gang of street thugs decide to pick a fight, they have no idea they've just triggered a storm. A former KGB operative forced into the shadows is about to remind the world why he was once feared by entire nations. Stay tuned, because this is more than a fight. It's a battle for survival, redemption, and vengeance. And it all starts right here. Before we jump into this gripping story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. It was a bitterly cold evening in Brooklyn, the kind that made you question why anyone would still be outside. Viktor Orlov sat on a creaky wooden bench in McCarran Park, his weathered trench coat barely holding back the chill. Once a legendary operative in the KGB, Viktor was now just another face among the city's forgotten, blending into the streets with a bottle of cheap vodka as his only comfort. The park was quiet except for the occasional hum of passing cars. Viktor's sharp eyes, though tired, missed nothing. A lifetime of discipline and vigilance still burned deep within him, even if the world now thought of him as a nobody. The uneasy peace was broken by a group of teenagers stomping down the path. Their voices were loud, brash, and laced with cruel laughter. At the head of the pack was Dario Morales, a wiry, hot-headed 19-year-old with a penchant for trouble and something to prove. Dario and his gang didn't come to the park for fresh air. They shoved over a food vendor's cart, sending half-eaten pretzels rolling across the ground. They jeered at an elderly couple walking a dog, causing the pair to hurry off. Then their eyes landed on Viktor, sitting alone under a broken streetlight, his weathered face bathed in shadows. "Yo, Grandpa!" Dario called out, grinning as he motioned to his crew. "What you drinking? Let's see it." Viktor ignored him, keeping his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Dario stepped closer, snatching the bottle from Viktor's side. He held it up like a trophy, inspecting the label with mock curiosity. "Damn, this is the good stuff, huh?" Before he could take a sip, Viktor's hand shot out and clamped around Dario's wrist like a steel trap. The speed and strength of the movement shocked the group into silence. "Return it," Viktor said in a low, steady voice. His accent was faint, but the command in his tone was unmistakable. "What the?" Gary yanked at his arm, but Viktor's grip didn't budge. One of the other teams, a burly kid named Luis, pulled a knife from his jacket. "Let him go, old man!" he shouted, brandishing the blade. Viktor stood up slowly, towering over Dario, his icy blue eyes fixed on Luis. His expression was calm, but there was an unmistakable shift in the air, something dangerous, something predatory. "You want to do this?" Viktor asked, his tone devoid of fear. Luis hesitated. Before anyone could react, Viktor moved. He twisted Dario's wrist, forcing the boy to drop the bottle. With a swift pivot, he disarmed Luis, sending the knife clattering to the ground. Viktor then delivered a quick, precise blow to the side of Luis's neck, dropping him like a sack of bricks. The others rushed forward, but it was futile. Viktor's movements were a blur, efficient and brutal. He struck pressure points, disabled joints, and neutralized each of them with practiced ease. Moments later, the gang was sprawled out on the pavement, groaning in pain. Dario, clutching his wrist, looked up at Viktor with wide, terrified eyes. "You've had your fun," Viktor said, picking up his bottle and sitting back down on the bench. "Now leave." The gang scrambled to their feet and bolted, their bravado replaced by sheer panic. As Viktor took a long drink, he felt a flicker of the man he used to be. The cold night air wrapped around him, but the stillness returned. Unbeknownst to him, someone had been watching, a shadowed figure who now slipped silently into the night, carrying with them the spark of something that would soon change Viktor's quiet existence forever. It had been 2 days since Viktor's confrontation with the gang in McCarran Park. The bruises and stories they carried had spread like wildfire among the local street crews, sparking curiosity and resentment in equal measure. Viktor, however, remained unfazed. He found a spot in an abandoned warehouse near the docks, a space to sleep and think. His quiet life of isolation was suddenly pulling him back into the chaos he had long tried to escape. Meanwhile, a local enforcer named Raul Del Vecchio, a corrupt ex-cop turned mercenary, had been growing restless. He'd made a lucrative career from underhanded deals and dirty contracts, but whispers about an old man taking down a crew of armed teenagers piqued his interest. Del Vecchio hated loose ends. And even more, he despised someone making him look vulnerable in his territory. Unbeknownst to Victor, Del Vecchio had connections to a network of dirty law enforcement officers operating as enforcers for crime bosses. Among them was Detective Marcus Sloan, who had been quietly cleaning up Del Vecchio's messes for years. When Del Vecchio brought the incident to Sloan's attention, they decided to act. Their plan was simple: make an example of the old man who dared to disrupt their business. They set their sights on Victor and his nightly route to a small soup kitchen near the docks. Victor shuffled down the desolate street, his silhouette blending with the city's forgotten corners. The weight of years hung on his shoulders, but his stride was deliberate. Tonight he was carrying a small package of canned food from the soup kitchen, a favor granted by a kind volunteer named Alina. As Victor approached a dimly lit underpass, he sensed it: movement. His instincts, dulled by years of self-neglect, sharpened like a blade. Well, a voice sneered from the shadows. If it isn't the legend himself. Victor stopped in his tracks, his cold eyes scanning the figures emerging from the darkness. 5 men, each armed with knives and crude weapons. Leading them was Raul Del Vecchio, his smug grin illuminated by a flickering street lamp. "Looks like you made some friends, old man," Raul said, stepping forward. "Too bad you don't know when to stay down." Victor sighed, dropping the package gently to the ground. His voice was calm but carried an edge. "You have a chance to walk away. Take it." Raul chuckled, motioning for his men to close in. "You think I'm scared of some washed-up drunk? Get him." The thugs surged forward, but Victor moved first. He disarmed the closest man in a blur, his years of training manifesting in swift, brutal efficiency. A knife was wrenched away, its wielder disarmed with a sharp elbow to the temple. Another attacker swung a pipe, but Victor sidestepped, using the momentum to flip him to the ground. Raul watched in disbelief as his crew crumbled. His smirk vanished, replaced by panic. He pulled a gun, but Victor was faster. With a well-aimed kick, the weapon flew from Raul's hand, clattering to the ground. "You've underestimated me," Victor said, his voice low and steady. Raul backed away, clutching his ribs. "You're crazy, man. Who the hell are you?" Victor didn't answer. He simply picked up his package and walked away, leaving Raul and his men groaning in the gutter. So, the altercation did not go unnoticed. In a black sedan parked nearby, Marcus Sloan watched through binoculars, his face twisted in anger and curiosity. The man he'd expected to be an easy target had dismantled Raul's crew with alarming precision. Sloan pulled out his phone and dialed. "We've got a problem," he said. "He's not some vagrant. Dig into his past. I want to know who we're dealing with." As Sloan drove away, Victor disappeared into the city's labyrinth, unaware that his quiet existence was unraveling. The scars of his past were about to resurface, and this time there would be no escaping them. The narrow streets of Brooklyn buzzed with life, but in Victor Orloff's world, silence was a strategy. Seated in a cramped diner on 8th Avenue, he stirred a coffee that had long gone cold. Victor was observing, calculating. He hadn't missed the black sedan that had been tailing him for days, nor the man with the cheap suit and an earpiece who had slipped into the booth 2 tables away. Victor sighed. It was only a matter of time before his past caught up to him. Detective Marcus Sloan was done playing games. The fiasco with Raul had made one thing clear: Victor wasn't just an ordinary vagrant. After running a preliminary check, Sloan had stumbled upon fragments of old intelligence files. While much was classified, one name kept appearing: Victor Orloff, a former operative with a dangerous reputation. Sloan wasn't a fool. He knew he needed more than a single failed ambush to deal with someone like Victor, so he devised a new plan. Using a network of informants, Sloan reached out to Dario Morales, the young thug who had barely survived his first encounter with Victor. Fueled by bruised pride and the chance to redeem himself in Sloan's eyes, Dario agreed to the detective's offer. The plan was simple: bait Victor into showing his hand. Late that evening, Victor returned to his makeshift shelter near the docks, carrying a loaf of bread and a small container of soup from the diner. The faint hum of the East River was the only sound accompanying his solitary meal. But then came the footsteps. Victor didn't react immediately, even as the group closed in. "Look who's still kicking," Dario said, stepping out from the shadows. He was flanked by 4 men, each larger and meaner than the last. This wasn't the same group Victor had dealt with before. These were hired muscle, and they meant business. Victor slowly placed his meal aside and stood up, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The narrow alley provided no easy escape, and the thugs had deliberately positioned themselves to block his way. "You should have stayed out of sight, old man," Dario sneered. "But now we settle this." Victor said nothing. His stillness unnerved the men, but Dario mistook it for fear. One of the hired thugs stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Let's teach him a lesson, Al." The first punch came fast, but Victor was faster. He sidestepped the blow, using his attacker's momentum to slam him into the wall. The man crumpled to the ground, groaning. The others hesitated for only a moment before charging. Victor moved with the fluidity of a predator, his strikes precise and devastating. A punch to the ribs, an elbow to the jaw, a knee to the abdomen. Each move incapacitated another thug. Dario watched in horror as his hired muscle fell one by one. Panicking, he pulled a knife and lunged at Victor. This time, Victor didn't hold back. He disarmed Dario with a brutal twist of the wrist, sending the knife clattering to the ground. Then, grabbing the boy by the collar, he slammed him against the wall. "Who sent you?" Victor growled, his voice cold and menacing. Dario stammered, his bravado completely gone. It was Sloan, Detective Sloan." Victor's eyes narrowed. He released Dario, who collapsed to the ground, clutching his chest and gasping for air. "You've made a mistake," Victor said, stepping back. "Tell your detective that his games won't end well for him." Sloan wasn't the only one with resources. That night, Victor made his way to a run-down bar on the outskirts of Queens, a place frequented by those who thrived in the shadows. He found who he was looking for in a back booth. Mikhail, a grizzled man with a thick Russian accent and connections to everything illegal in the city. "I need information," Victor said, sliding a wad of cash across the table. Mikhail raised an eyebrow but pocketed the money without question. "What kind of information?" "A man named Sloan," Victor replied. "Detective. Works with dirty cops and mercenaries. I need to know his operations, his weaknesses." Mikhail nodded slowly. "Sloan has powerful friends, but everyone has their price. Give me 2 days." As Victor left the bar, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sloan wasn't the only threat. The black sedan was back, parked across the street. This time, Victor didn't ignore it. He walked directly toward the car. The driver, startled, tried to pull away, but Victor was faster. He opened the door and yanked the man out, pinning him against the hood. "Who do you work for?" Victor demanded. The man stammered. It's just a job. They told me to watch you, that's all." "Who?" Victor pressed. The man's fear was palpable. "I don't know. They paid in cash." Victor released him and stepped back, watching as the man scrambled into the car and sped off. Back at his shelter, Victor sat in silence, piecing together the events. Sloan wasn't acting alone. Someone higher up was pulling the strings, and Victor's instincts told him this was only the beginning. His quiet life was gone. The shadows of his past were circling closer, and Victor knew one thing for certain: if war was coming, he wouldn't face it lying down. Brooklyn's early morning streets buzzed with activity, but Victor Orloff moved like a ghost. His face remained impassive as he entered an old tailor's shop. It was one of his few safe havens in the city, a quiet place owned by an old friend, Yuri, who once worked as an informant in Moscow. Yuri didn't ask questions. He knew better. "You look tired," Yuri said, handing Victor a cup of tea. "I don't sleep much these days," Victor replied, his eyes scanning the shop's cluttered shelves. "You have the look of a man being hunted." Victor didn't respond. He set the tea aside and reached into his jacket, pulling out a photograph of a tattoo, a geometric design that marked its wearer as a member of SP9, an Eastern European syndicate known for ruthless efficiency. "Tell me what you know," Victor said. Yuri's face darkened. "They've expanded. Drugs, weapons, laundering. SP9's reach is global now, but their heart is still in the old country." He hesitated. "If they've come here, it's not for small business." Victor nodded, filing the information away. He had encountered SP9 operatives during his KGB days. They were disciplined, well-funded, and dangerous. The realization that they were operating in New York didn't surprise him, it infuriated him. Meanwhile, in a courthouse across the city, Judge Samuel Green sat in his chambers, staring at his trembling hands. The kidnappers had called again. They didn't want money. They wanted him to overturn a high-profile case. Angela Marquez, a wealthy banker accused of vehicular manslaughter, had been tied to SP9. Letting her go would allow the syndicate to maintain control over a lucrative money laundering operation. Samuel's mind raced. If he refused, his son would die. But if he complied, he would betray everything he stood for. As Samuel wrestled with his decision, Victor was closing in on the syndicate's local operations. He had tracked down a low-level enforcer named Nico, a man with more bravado than sense. Nico was the type who loved to flaunt his connections, but didn't have the nerve to face real danger. Cornering him in a dingy nightclub, Victor made his presence known by dragging Nico out of the VIP lounge and slamming him into a wall. "Who's running SP9 in New York?" Victor demanded, his voice a low growl. "I don't know, man," Nico stammered. Victor tightened his grip. "Try again." Eraser nodded. Nico's eyes darted around the room, searching for help that wouldn't come. Okay. It's Kirill Zolotov. He's running things out of a warehouse in Red Hook." Victor released him with a shove. "Stay out of my way." The next day, Judge Green delayed his ruling as long as he could, stalling for time while silently praying for a miracle. Angela Marquez sat confidently at the defendant's table, flanked by a team of expensive lawyers. Her smug demeanor told Samuel that she believed the outcome was already decided. While weighed his options, Victor infiltrated the Red Hook warehouse. What he found confirmed his worst fears. SP9 was more entrenched than he had imagined. Crates of illegal firearms, pallets of counterfeit cash, and a makeshift control room filled with surveillance monitors. While Victor gathered evidence, Samuel received another call from the kidnappers. They demanded he announce Angela's acquittal immediately or his son would die. Samuel's voice cracked as he promised to comply. At the same time, Victor intercepted a live feed showing Samuel's son, blindfolded and tied to a chair in a dingy basement. Using the syndicate's own systems against them, Victor traced the location to an abandoned tenement on the city's outskirts. The tenement was heavily guarded, but Victor had faced worse odds. Armed with the silenced pistol and a sharp mind, he took out the sentries one by one, moving through the building like a phantom. Inside, he found Samuel's son, pale but unharmed. As Victor freed him, a voice crackled through a nearby radio. "Valeria, is the judge ready to comply?" Victor picked up the radio. "Not today." Victor delivered Samuel's son to a safe location and contacted the judge. "Your son is safe. Do what you must." With renewed resolve, Samuel returned to the courtroom and delivered a scathing indictment of Angela Marquez and the SP9 syndicate. His ruling sent shockwaves through the city, drawing national attention to the case. As Samuel stood firm, Victor prepared for retaliation. SP9 wouldn't take this loss lightly. He knew they would come for both him and the judge, and he would be ready. In a hidden corner of the city, Victor armed himself with weapons from the warehouse, vowing to dismantle the syndicate piece by piece. The hunt was far from over. The cold air hung heavy over the city, as Victor Orlov stood atop an abandoned factory roof, watching the glowing skyline in the distance. His plans were in motion, but he knew better than anyone that the fight wasn't over. SP9 was wounded, not defeated, and wounded animals were often the most dangerous. Below, the faint hum of vehicles echoed through the empty streets. Victor's sharp eyes caught the flicker of headlights approaching. He had baited them with false intel, an anonymous tip suggesting that Judge Samuel Green was staying in a safe house nearby. 3 black SUVs screeched to a halt. Men in tactical gear poured out, weapons drawn, their movements precise and rehearsed. This wasn't just a hit squad. These were professionals, likely flown in directly from Eastern Europe. From his vantage point, Victor calmly observed their positions, noting their patterns and weaknesses. With practiced precision, he activated a small device on his wrist. A remote signal jammer. The men's radios hissed with static, throwing their coordination into chaos. "Time to introduce myself," Victor muttered, descending silently into the shadows. Inside the building, the squad spread out, their boots crunching on broken glass and debris. They moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. Victor struck without warning. Emerging from the darkness, he incapacitated the first man with a chokehold, his silenced pistol dropping the second before the others even realized what was happening. "Victor, control your breathing," Victor whispered, dragging one of the unconscious bodies out of sight. The remaining men, panicked and disoriented, made mistakes. Mistakes Victor exploited. One by one the hit squad fell until only their leader remained. A burly man with a thick accent, he held his weapon tightly, scanning the room with growing desperation. "Come out, you coward," he roared. Victor stepped into the dim light, his face calm, his weapon lowered. "You've made a mistake coming here," he said in flawless Russian. The man's bravado faltered. "Who are you?" Victor stepped closer, his voice cold and deliberate. "I'm the man you were sent to kill, and now you will tell me everything." Tied to a chair in a dimly lit basement, the squad leader glared defiantly at Victor. Blood trickled from his nose, but his resolve hadn't cracked. Yet. "Do you know what SP9 will do to me if I talk?" he spat. Victor leaned in, his expression icy. "And do you know what I'll do to you if you don't?" The man hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes. Victor didn't need to say more. He had a reputation that preceded him, and he knew exactly how to use it. "They're regrouping," the man finally admitted. "Kirill Zolotov ordered us to secure the judge. He's furious about the case being exposed." "And the syndicate's operations in the city?" Victor pressed. The man hesitated again before spilling the details. SP9's headquarters was hidden in a high-end nightclub downtown, a front for laundering money, trafficking weapons, and controlling their influence over corrupt officials. Victor nodded, satisfied. He left the man unconscious, ensuring he wouldn't be able to warn his comrades. Armed with this new information, Victor prepared for his next move. He contacted Judge Green, warning him to stay hidden and trust no one. Meanwhile, he reached out to Yuri, his old friend, for one last favor. "Can you get me inside the club?" Victor asked over a secure line. Yuri sighed. "It's risky, but I have a connection. You'll have to go in as a buyer, a wealthy investor interested in SP9 services." "Perfect," Victor said, already planning his approach. The nightclub was a pulsating labyrinth of neon lights and pounding music, its decadent atmosphere masking the criminal empire hidden within. Victor entered dressed sharply, his demeanor that of a man accustomed to power and wealth. Guided by Yuri's contact, he was led to a private lounge where Kirill Zolotov awaited. The SP9 boss was a towering figure with sharp features and an air of arrogance. "So, you're the investor?" Kirill said, eyeing Victor suspiciously. "I am," Victor replied smoothly, adopting the role. "I've heard a lot about your organization. I'm impressed." Kirill smirked, but his eyes remained cold. "Flattery will get you nowhere. What exactly do you want?" As Victor began to spin a convincing story, his keen eyes took in every detail of the room, the guards' positions, the hidden cameras, the escape routes. He wasn't here to make a deal. He was here to dismantle the operation from within. As Victor planted a discreet device under the table, the power in the club suddenly flickered. Kirill's smirk vanished, replaced by suspicion. "What's going on?" he barked at his men. Before anyone could react, the device detonated, not with a deadly force but enough to plunge the building into chaos. The lights went out and the crowd panicked, flooding the exits. In the ensuing confusion, Victor struck. He neutralized Kirill's guards with ruthless efficiency and cornered the syndicate leader in his private office. "You should have stayed in Europe," Victor said, leveling his weapon at Kirill. The man sneered, even as fear flickered in his eyes. "You think killing me will stop SP9? We're everywhere." Victor's expression hardened. "Then I'll keep going." By dawn, the nightclub was in shambles. Police raided the scene, finding enough evidence to cripple SP9's operations in the city. Kirill Zolotov was dead, and his empire was in disarray. Judge Green's name was cleared, and his son was reunited with him. As for Victor, he vanished into the city's shadows once more, knowing his work was far from finished. The syndicate's reach was vast, but so was Victor's resolve. He wasn't just surviving, he was fighting back. The chaos Victor unleashed at the nightclub sent shockwaves through New York's underworld. SP9's allies scrambled, their operations in disarray. But Victor knew better than to celebrate. Kirill's death wasn't an end. It was an invitation for retaliation. In a dimly lit apartment in Queens, a man named Sergei Petrov sat at his kitchen table, methodically cleaning a handgun. Sergei was SP9's contingency plan, a sleeper agent embedded in the city for years, waiting for the moment he'd be called into action. The phone buzzed. A voice on the other end spoke in Russian, cold and efficient. "Kirill is dead. The operation is compromised. You know what to do." Sergei's expression didn't change. He ended the call, finished assembling the gun, and packed a small bag. His mission was clear: find Viktor Orlov and eliminate him. Viktor, meanwhile, had retreated to a safe house, a dilapidated brownstone in an abandoned part of the city. He worked in silence, poring over maps and stolen documents, piecing together the remnants of SP9's network. A knock at the door shattered his focus. Viktor grabbed his pistol, moving soundlessly toward the door. "Who is it?" he demanded. "It's Elena," came the reply. He opened the door cautiously. Elena, the volunteer from the soup kitchen, stood there holding a folder. Her usually warm demeanor was replaced with urgency. "I thought you might need this," she said, handing him the folder. Inside were photos, addresses, and detailed notes about SP9's operations. Victor's eyes narrowed. "How did you get this?" Elena hesitated. "I have connections. Let's just say you're not the only one who wants them gone," the man said. Victor studied her for a moment before nodding. "You're risking a lot by coming here." "So are you," Elena replied. "Let's call it even." "What?" As Victor analyzed the new intel, he discovered SP9's fallback plan, a smuggling operation running through the city's port. The syndicate was regrouping, using the chaos to transport weapons and cash out of New York before law enforcement closed in. But Victor also found something more personal, a hit order with his name on it. "They've sent someone," he muttered, piecing it together. "A professional." Elena frowned. "What are you going to do?" "Turn the tables," Victor said, his voice cold. Sergei tracked Victor to an abandoned factory, drawn there by a trail of false leads Victor had planted. The factory was a maze of rusted machinery and crumbling walls, perfect for an ambush. As Sergei moved cautiously through the shadows, his gun at the ready, Victor watched from above. He had studied Sergei's profile, a former operative with skills rivaling his own. This wouldn't be a simple fight. "You've come a long way," Victor's voice echoed through the cavernous space. Sergei froze, scanning the darkness. Viktor Orlov. The legend himself. "I'm flattered," Victor said, stepping into view. "But you should have stayed in the shadows." The two men faced off, their movements calculated. Victor feinted left, drawing Sergei's fire before vanishing into the maze of machinery. Sergei pursued, his frustration mounting as Victor outmaneuvered him at every turn. The fight escalated into a brutal, close-quarters brawl. Blows landed with bone-crunching force as the two operatives tested each other's limits. But Victor's experience and adaptability gave him the edge. With a final decisive strike, he disarmed Sergei and pinned him against a wall. "Who sent you?" Victor demanded. Sergei smirked, blood trickling from his lip. "You know who." Victor's grip tightened. "Then tell them this. I'm coming." He released Sergei, letting the man slump to the ground unconscious. Victor didn't kill him. He wanted him to deliver the message. The next day, a package arrived at the headquarters of SP9's New York remnants. Inside was a single, chilling message, written in bold, precise letters. "This city is no longer yours." Accompanying the note was Sergei's dog tags. Victor's war against SP9 was far from over, but the tide was turning. With allies like Elena and his own unrelenting determination, he was dismantling the syndicate piece by piece. As the city buzzed with rumors of his exploits, Victor disappeared once more into the shadows, preparing for the next battle. Because for men like him, the fight never truly ends. Viktor Orlov sat in a shadowed corner of a dingy diner, his battered trench coat blending into the worn upholstery of the booth. Across from him sat Elena, her expression hard but determined. Between them lay a crude map of New York's shipping district, marked with circles and hastily scrawled notes. "They're consolidating," Elena said, tapping one of the circles. "If the intel is right, SP9 is planning to move everything tonight. money, weapons, and personnel. Victor's icy blue eyes scanned the map. "They're trying to cut their losses," he murmured. "If we hit them here, we end it." Elena hesitated. "And if it's a trap?" Victor gave a faint smile. "Then we make them regret it." The docks were alive with activity. Floodlights illuminated the massive cargo ships as forklifts and trucks scurried about, moving crates marked with innocuous logos. But Victor knew what those crates truly contained: illegal arms and cash meant to rebuild SP9's operations elsewhere. Victor moved silently, his footsteps muffled by the hum of machinery. He had spent hours planting explosives along key points, ensuring that if things went sideways, SP9's operation would be reduced to ashes. From his perch atop a shipping container, Victor observed the scene. Dozens of armed men patrolled the area, their movements disciplined and efficient. At the center of it all was Mikhail Volkov, a high-ranking SP9 lieutenant who had stepped into Kirill's role after his death. Victor's radio crackled softly. "Are you in position?" It was Elena, her voice steady despite the tension. "I'm ready," Victor replied. "Stay back until the fireworks start." The first explosion ripped through a warehouse, sending a plume of fire and debris into the night sky. Chaos erupted as SP9's operatives scrambled to contain the damage. Victor used the distraction to strike, picking off guards with deadly precision as he moved closer to Volkov's command center. "Get everything on the ship," Volkov barked into his radio, his face twisted in rage. "We're leaving now." But Victor was already there. He descended on the command center like a ghost, taking out the guards with brutal efficiency. Within moments, it was just him and Volkov. "You think killing me will stop SP9? Volkov sneered, pulling a knife. "No," Victor said calmly, disarming him with a single strike. "But it's a start." With a swift motion, Victor incapacitated Volkov and tied him to a chair. As explosions continued to rock the docks, Victor interrogated Volkov. The lieutenant resisted at first, but Victor's cold persistence wore him down. "You don't understand," Volkov spat. "SP9 isn't just a gang. We're part of something bigger, a global network. You kill me, and another will take my place. It's endless." "Then tell me who's pulling the strings," Victor demanded. Volkov smirked through his pain. "Even if I told you, it wouldn't matter. You're one man, you can't stop them." "We'll see about that," Victor said, knocking him unconscious. As the last of SP9's assets were destroyed in a fiery inferno, Victor left a message for their higher-ups, a single encrypted file containing all the evidence he had gathered, sent to trusted law enforcement contacts across the globe. The message was clear: SP9's time was over. With the docks reduced to smoldering ruins and SP9's network shattered in New York, Victor retreated to a quiet rooftop overlooking the city. Elena joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "It's done," she said, handing him a cup. "For now," Victor replied, his gaze distant. "You could leave, you know," Elena said softly. "Start over, find some peace." Victor shook his head. "Men like me don't get peace. But maybe we can make the world a little less broken." Elena nodded, understanding. "So, what now?" Victor took a long sip of his coffee, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Now, we wait. They'll come looking, and when they do, I'll be ready." As the first rays of dawn broke over the city, Victor disappeared into the shadows once more, a man with no home but a purpose as clear as ever. Weeks later, a news report aired about the dismantling of an international crime syndicate with ties to SP9. Arrests were made across multiple countries, and key figures were exposed. In a small town far from the chaos, Victor sat in a modest cafe, watching the report on a flickering television. He allowed himself a faint smile before paying his bill and stepping into the street. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in years, Victor felt a glimmer of hope. Inspired by Victor's journey? Join us in celebrating stories of resilience and courage. Hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if faced with a world that needed saving? Let's keep these thrilling tales alive and unravel more untold stories together.